Come back here! You'll kill yourself running!
After the first Anne of Green Gables was made, doing a sequel to it was about as far from my mind as doing an ongoing series of it. I thought the whole thing was finished and done with, and you know, I'd enjoyed making the film and really enjoyed working with so many unique performers, but was looking to do other films. And I was met with this wash of enthusiasm that it sort of surprised me. I had everybody saying, "What happens?" Or, "Gosh, we didn't want the movie to end. We could have watched another hour of that movie." I'm thinking, God, the movie was 3 hours long. Both broadcasters came back to me and said, "Would you consider doing another Anne of Green Gables? Why don't you look at doing the other books? Look at doing Anne of Avonlea." And I really took a good look at the other books and went, pass, because I couldn't see anything in them that I was interested in telling a story out of. I could see an author being forced by her publisher to write sequel after sequel. And the stories were delightful, but they didn't have the profound effect that I felt that Montgomery had achieved in the first Anne, once I'd really come to understand the characters and understand the literary work. So I was faced with the fact that if I wanted to do anything more to do with Anne of Green Gables, I was going to have to invent a story. So it took me a while to get my head around that notion, but I read all the later books. I read Anne of Avonlea, Anne of the Island, and Anne of Windy Poplars. And out of that, I began to extract a sense of Montgomery's style of character, where she'd go with people, how she'd use them. And there were bits and pieces of characters that I liked that I sometimes melded into a completely original character, so that the character would sound like it was written by Montgomery, but in fact, I'd concocted the character. And I really developed an original story that pretty much took Anne away from Green Gables in a teaching career, took her to another place, another time. But in creating that, I really had to pull all these kinds of threads together and then find my own sense of where Anne's character was going to go. And I found the technique of keeping Anne and Gilbert apart and trying to conform their relationship as being the linchpin into how to try and depict their relationship on screen. And I looked at so many different types of stories that were from that era. I looked at other stories that had been written around that time to try and see what the similarities were and to try and see where romantic relationships went in the stories and how they were depicted. So out of that, I was kind of inspired to come up with a new story that took Anne and Gilbert's lives apart and then brought them back together again, and to pepper it with all kinds of unusual and very Montgomery-esque characters, and to try and find a sense of humor as well. So in some ways, it was a much more gothic story and a more difficult story to tell, because it was broader in scope, it was a little bit longer. It was also made in the shadow of this overwhelming success of Anne of Green Gables.
Please don't do this because you feel badly on my account.
Stuff and nonsense. I can be civil with Rachel as long as she stays out of my kitchen. We'll be quite capable of looking after the farm with Mr. Barry's help.
Marilla, do you never wish you'd adopted a boy like you intended to? He could have run this farm, saved you all this trouble.
And Shirley, I wouldn't trade you for a dozen boys. Now, you just mind that. Was it a boy that got the Bachelor of Arts and won the Rollings Reliable Story Contest? Now, was it? I'll miss you. I'll miss my girl. Promise me you won't stay away forever.
My goal is to tell, in some ways, a more profound story, a deeper story that really dealt with Anne and Gilbert as original characters and how their lives would be dismantled and how they'd have to construct their own lives together as a couple, as opposed to them just simply getting together at Anne of Green Gables and spending the rest of their lives together. Well, the cast of Anne 2 was as wonderful in some ways as Anne 1, because not only did many of the original characters come back, but I was able to create some unique and wonderful original characters. The character of Mrs. Harris, she was just an amazingly cantankerous old woman who came from very meager circumstances. but I liked the tone that she had, and I was able to take a lot of the way she approached the world and her sense of sarcasm and translate that into a very aristocratic woman. So then I had to think about, well, who would I cast in that part? And I remember having seen Wendy Hiller playing opposite Paul Scofield in the movie version of A Man for All Seasons. And I remembered something about the character that was part of what she played. And again, I offered her the role, and she came back just saying, I would love to play this part. I'd love to be in a movie with Colleen Dewhurst. She's my all-American theater idol, that great American actress she referred to her as. And again, there was a kind of a kismet to the whole thing, an immediate synergy. Wendy was disappointed that there weren't any scenes with Colleen when she actually showed up. But she was delightful and had an incredible sense of nobility and sense of style in terms of how to play that part. The irony is, on her very first day of shooting, she just had a hip operation and she was getting up into a buggy and her hip came out and she was lying on the ground in front of me. I thought she was having a heart attack, and I leaned into her, and she's got all her hat and everything else on, and she's lying on the ground in front of her house, and she says to me, "Get me a scotch, dear boy." And she was very concerned that she was going to become a liability to the production because she knew that she had to go back to England to have her hip put back into place. But I was successful at convincing her to stay, and we treated her with kid gloves, and she was really pretty hale and hearty. She was up for almost any situation.
Babies are never common. Each one is a miracle.
Well, I had 2 of them. I didn't see much that was miraculous about either of them.
Mama, you're so bright and cheerful today. However did you two get along, Miss Shirley?
I let her have a head, and we got on well enough. I don't care what the Pringles say. I think you're quite good looking.
Thank you.
I had to come up with a love interest for Anne that she really couldn't accept. And I had to bring in someone from a different world, a different level of society, to really throw her and to fall in love with her. I developed the role of Morgan Harris kind of almost based on my own father, because my father married my mother. He was in his 60s and my mother was 20. He was very well established, part of the old guard in terms of where he was in his career and in society. And my mother was this young woman who came in and turned his life upside down. So I could understand how 2 people like that could get together. It made it very plausible for me to be able to write about a character who was in his 40s falling in love with someone who was in their late teens. So when I was looking for someone to play that part, ironically, it was Colleen Dewhurst again who recommended Frank Converse. And I thought he was absolutely bang on to play that kind of well-heeled, moneyed, New Englandish type of aristocrat.